Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the Tissue Viability Society for inviting me here today to give you an overview of this ongoing randomised control trial into the evaluation of the use of fibreglass heel casts in the management of ulcers of the heel in diabetes. As Tina said, I'm a diabetes specialist, podiatrist, whatever that means. I'm lucky at present to be seconded to the coordinating centre for this trial, which is the Foot Ulcer Trials Unit in Nottingham. This was established in 2003 by Dr. Francis Game and the now familiar figure of Professor William Jeffcoat. And their aim was to increase the evidence base in this traditionally under-researched area of medicine. In the years that have followed, they've completed numerous trials, numerous pieces of work, all contributing extensively to the field of diabetic foot complications and their management. And it is vital, I know we've already heard about research, and I will keep going on about it a bit, but it's vital that we all underpin our work with research based on evidence from strong trials such as these. I know that sounds obvious, but all too often in our day-to-day practice, it's just not the case. Anyway, off soapbox, onto heels. Diabetic foot ulcers are a problem wherever they occur on the foot, and you're the last audience I need to tell that heel ulcers pose particular challenges. They're difficult to resolve. They take a long time to resolve, if indeed they ever do. And unlike many of the forefoot ulcers in diabetes, they are often painful. And this is because of the frequent ischemic element of them, and also the fact that diabetic peripheral neuropathy is distal. When we get to the heel, the nerves have often been spared, and that's good and bad news for our patients. And yet, despite guidelines of principles of care from the Royal College of Nursing, from NICE, and from the International Working Group on the Diabetic Foot, no specific treatments or interventions have yet shown to improve outcomes. And so we come to the cast itself. In 2008, a very dynamic and rather flamboyant podiatrist in Manchester named Louise Stewart developed a small, lightweight cast that was individually moulded to the patient's heel, with a reinforced slab of the same material over the ulcer area. It can be worn within the dressing, and it could often be worn in the patient's own shoe. It seemed inconceivable that this flimsy device could offer anything to the potentially devastating condition of heel ulcers. And yet, in an uncontrolled trial of 50 patients with peripheral vascular disease, both with and without diabetes, the results, as you can see, were very promising. On the back of this and our own observations of using the casts in the Nottingham Diabetic Foot Clinic, Professor Jeffcoat and Dr. Game submitted a grant application to the HTA. It fitted all the criteria, was accepted, and the heel cast trial began. It's an observer-blind, multi-centre randomised controlled trial. I'll come on a bit more to that in a second. The patients are randomised to one of two arms in the trial, the intervention arm, which means they get the heel cast and usual care, and the control arm, which means they just get the usual care. And usual care in this instance means the centre's own choice of dressings, of offloading, of antibiotics. It's not stipulated into the protocol as to what this is, but it is all recorded for analysis later. Whether the patient goes into the intervention or control group is decided remotely. All their details are entered onto a web-based electronic case report form. A button is pressed, and a nifty computer program in the background sends you the answer as to which arm of the trial that patient is in. And this means that at the end of the trial, there should be equal numbers of large and small ulcers of grade 2, 3 and 4 in each of those arms. Obviously, we can't use a placebo in this trial. The patient has to be aware of which arm of the trial they're in, as does the researcher carrying out the visit. The blinding comes by, in two ways, by an observer that is a clinical person within that unit who does not know which arm of the trial the patient's in. They assess the wound regularly, assess it for healing, and all the other outcomes are also analysed by people who don't know whether that patient had the heel cast or not. There are 27 centres throughout the UK at the moment taking part in this trial. These are they. I don't know if anybody works in any of them, or indeed if anybody has contributed to recruiting patients for the trial. If you have, thank you very much, because we do need 529 participants to complete the evaluation. This rather rounded figure was established by using this very simple calculation, and if you understand that straight away, you're obviously doing research already, or you're actually in totally the wrong profession. Anyway, something we all do understand, and that's every trial has to have inclusion and exclusion criteria. In this case, this study, it's not too onerous. They've got to have diabetes, they've got to have an ulcer on the heel. The ethics committee in this instance decided that people who were unable to consent would not be included in the trial, that the trial could actually be done without those people who couldn't understand the protocol. So be it. The exclusion criteria are such that nobody in a cast that's non-removable can be entered into the trial. Those who are receiving topical negative pressure or application of larvae to the wound cannot be in the trial. And those people who are off to Benidorm for 3 months are not included, as they're unlikely to pop back every couple of weeks for their trial visits. My involvement in the trial, other than carrying out trial visits in Nottingham, has been the standardisation of the cast throughout the centres. I've been very lucky to visit all these centres, so it's been a great experience for me as well to see how other places work. But it's important for the trial outcome that all the casts are manufactured and applied in the same way. But it's more important that the casts are safe to use and that the patients aren't going to have any adverse events from using that can be avoided, because despite their harmless, innocuous looks, they can cause harm. And this was an example of a cast applied directly to the patient's skin that developed a crease in it and rubbed the skin. Now, I know there is a demonstration later on of soft cast, and I'm sure they'll dwell far more on the aspects of safety, the safety element within them. We also found very early on, as I'm sure Jill will agree with, that the labelling of the casts was very important. We frequently had casts put on. This is a giant one from Nottingham here. We frequently had, it's not a real foot, Jill. We frequently had casts put on upside down, back to front, even on the wrong foot. So it became pretty obvious very early on that the labelling was very important. And that's been standardised across the trial as well. All of the procedures for producing and applying the cast were backed up with written pictorial study-specific procedures and a very nifty DVD that we made to go along with it. I just want to say something about this word. It's a word that's become a favourite of mine since this trial began, and that is equipoise. Now, as far as clinical research is concerned, this means that the people carrying out the research should have no preconceived ideas as to whether the intervention will be effective or not. It did mean, in the case of this trial, that some centres that were approached to take part in it actually declined. They were already using the cast and they believed it to be effective, and they did not feel comfortable in randomising people, perhaps in the arm of the control arm, to not using it. We and the other centres involved took the decision to stop using the casts in our day-to-day clinics. The only people who would have a cast were those who were randomised to them in the trial. It would have been rather hypocritical of Nottingham not to do that, bearing in mind that the foot ulcer trials unit is all about proof when the results are in. And these results are going to be, at the end of the day, the primary outcome will be the percentage of ulcers that are healed at 24 weeks, which is the length of time that the patient is in the study for. And healing in this case is being defined as epithelialisation maintained for 4 weeks. And as I've already said, that will be confirmed by a blinded assessor, somebody who does not know whether the patient had the heel cast or not. There are secondary outcome measures, ulcer-related, patient-related and health economic analysis. The ulcer-related ones include time to healing, change in ulcer area and adverse events. The patient-related ones are being collected from a visual analogue scale of pain, from a mood and function questionnaire called EQ5D that I'm sure some of you will have heard about, and the Cardiff Wound Impact Scale. The health economic analysis is at its basics, cost effectiveness of the intervention. It will look at the percentage of the ulcers that are healed. It will take into account the costs of training, the costs of materials, and the costs of applying the cast. And it will also look at quality adjusted life years, because it's no good an intervention being effective if it sacrifices quality of life for quantity. Where are we at the moment? Well, we're well on the way to that figure of 529. The recruitment began in May 2011. The graph has steadily risen quite nicely ever since then. A few little blips for Christmas and summers. The results will be analysed and hopefully ready for dissemination in summer next year. And what it will come down to is if there is a 15% reduction increase in the rate of healing in the intervention group in this trial, then the heel casts will have shown that they have a major clinical impact in the treatment of heel ulcers in people with diabetes. So watch this space, and thank you very much.